This is Kim Andrews.
And Molly Wade.
And this is Swimming in the Deep End for deep healing and peace.
We are here to have courageous conversations about our journeys so that we can all create lives overflowing with freedom and joy.
So we're starting with my story. This is Kim. And it's interesting that this is happening today because I was just in Maryland where I lived for 35 years. I moved to the Washington, D.C. area when I was in college. I did my last 2 years at American University. And then I just stayed afterwards. And the reason why is part of my story. I was actually trying to get out of the house. And my dad and I were fighting like cats and dogs. So I realized on this journey when I was in Maryland, especially when I got close to the area where I lived, there was quite a bit of sadness, and it's not the first time I've experienced that when I've been in that area. And I started to feel the sadness, a lot of the pain that I felt there, things that I went through, things that I healed from and obviously need to heal on a deeper level now. I think a lot of those feelings were coming up precisely because Molly and I are working on this podcast, and I was about to tell my story today. So I had some tears in the car as I was driving to the airport. I knew that I had to forgive myself for a number of things. And I repeated over and over, I forgive myself, I forgive myself, I forgive myself. And at the same time, giving myself grace. Because I know at the time, at that young age of 19 and through my 20s and 30s, that, I did what I knew to do with the consciousness that I had at the time, with the mindset that I had at the time. And I have evolved since then, and now I would make different decisions. In fact, many of the things I went through then wouldn't even come into my life now, would not be a part of my existence, because I'm a much more evolved woman, and I'm comfortable in my own skin, and I have a set of values and beliefs that are central to how I live, principles by which I live, and I had none of that back then. I wasn't swimming in the deep end. I was drowning in the deep end, and I had a lot of emotion in the car. When I said that there were tears, there definitely were, and I could feel them this morning because I weep for her, the woman that I was then, the little girl that I was growing up, and the one thing I'll say here about all of that is that I think it's important that we give ourselves grace, and that we do realize that at different times of our lives, we were perhaps different people and are not like we are now. So I'll begin at the very beginning, back when I was small in my family of origin. So I have an older sister who's now deceased and a younger brother. And my parents, God bless them, wonderful people. And they really did their best. And one of the things I love them for the most is because they sacrificed greatly to give my siblings and me the very best that they could. They didn't have nice cars. We didn't vacation in wonderful places. Every once in a while, we could afford to go to Connecticut or Delaware or something like that. I grew up in New Jersey, so whatever was a quick car ride to somewhere interesting, they would take us. My sister and I did ballet, 4-H. We were all in the Scouts. We went on school trips, and my parents did without a lot in order for us to have good lives. We went to Catholic school. They paid tuition. And, I was on a teacher's salary, and my mother worked part-time while we were in school. So they did without a lot. They really did. And my mother came into her marriage with quite a bit of trauma from her family of origin, and my father, I did too. I don't know the details of his trauma, but they were not happy in their marriage. They were both trying to get away from home, and that's not the best way to start a marriage, but that's what happened. And so there wasn't a lot of affection between them. I've rarely witnessed affection between my parents. And when I did, I was much older, and it came across as an anomaly. I couldn't believe it. Like, my siblings and I would kind of stare at them and look at them like, like, what is that? Like, gee, mom just kissed dad. But that was not their usual. It was just, I didn't realize that as an anomaly until later, because that was our life. My mother taught us to walk on eggshells around my father because he really was kind of unpredictable. He wasn't an angry man, but he was very exacting, very strict disciplinarian. And I know now that it was because he just wanted us to be good people, good citizens. He wanted us to know how to conduct ourselves in public. He wanted to be proud of us. He wanted us to be proud of ourselves. And I interpreted that as that I needed to be perfect. And I'm also a Virgo, and if you look at the description of a Virgo personality, I am that thing from point to point exactly. And Virgos are detail-oriented, and we are perfectionists. And so I took my father's drive for excellence and his desire for me and my siblings to also be excellent as a drive for perfection. So I became afraid of most things because I knew I couldn't do them perfectly in the beginning. And the truth is that we do nothing perfectly at the beginning, at the start. It just doesn't happen. We have to learn. There's a learning curve for everything. But I took that to way out of proportion. And so I always second-guessed myself. My father always wanted me to have perfect grades. And when I didn't, he came down on me pretty hard. And it was different for my siblings because he had different expectations for them. And so I took that quite personally and always thought I never measured up. Because I didn't. You can't measure up to perfection. There's no such thing. Things are perfect as they are in process. I know that now. I didn't know that as a young girl. And because we were taught to walk around on eggshells around my father, I was afraid of conflict. And I hid my feelings about things. And I just towed the line. I was taught to respect my elders, but I also was afraid of them. And that's just the way that we lived. I think it's okay to have a healthy fear of your parents because they are not here to be our friends. That's what I believe. I believe that they are here to guide us into this world. And there are sometimes we are not going to like our parents because tough love sometimes is necessary, I believe. And that comes from me not having any children, not ever having raised anyone. So my early life I spent just trying to please and wanting to be approved of and wanting to be accepted. And that's not always possible. And it can be exhausting. And so I spent a lot of my young life just being exhausted, trying to figure out what people needed and what they wanted from me, and wondering how I was going to possibly do all of that. And kept my head to the ground. And I always liked to read. But as a young girl, I read to escape. And I would read fiction, and I a second book before I ended the first book because I always needed to have some place to escape. I ran to read about other people's lives because some days I didn't want to be in mine. And I don't want to paint a picture that my life was ugly. It certainly was not. There's a lot of joy, and there was always music in our house. My father had a wonderful, wonderful tenor voice, and he sang a lot, and he loved music, and we listened to all kinds of music in our house. There wasn't, a type of music that we didn't listen to or hear. My father often sang, and I absolutely loved that. And he belonged to the Choral Arts Society, and I would go with him. I don't remember the whole family going. I remember being with him by myself a lot, going to hear him sing in concerts, and I absolutely loved it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love music so much. So there was a lot of joy there, and my parents did give us a lot. And we were poor, but I didn't really know we were poor until I started comparing my life to others' lives. Right. And I got out into the world a little bit more because my parents always found free things for us to do that were engaging and fun. We did a lot of crafts. We made a lot of our Christmas decorations because we couldn't afford to buy new ones every single year. I learned how to sew, and we did crochet and knitting, and it was fun. I mean, I had a creative life and started singing myself at a young age, even though I was afraid to sing in public. I didn't learn how to do that until I was probably in my 30s. So I did have a good life, and it was hard. And being in a family where so my parents showed us a lot of affection. My father, not so much, because he worked a lot. He worked 2 jobs quite a bit because, kids in Catholic school, 3 of them, and extracurricular activities, and 2 cars, and a mortgage. So he worked hard, and so he was absent because he was working. And so I didn't really know my father that well. I just knew that when he was home, we needed to give him a wide berth. And at the same time, he still did try to make time for us. We went fishing a lot with him on the weekends. I hated having to go out in the backyard and find the worms and put them in an empty coffee can. My brother and I were given that job. But, I loved being with him, sitting by the water, and we were just quiet together, and he would fish. And my brother and I were usually playing or baiting the hooks and things like that. And those were our happy times. We went to the shore a lot. I grew up in New Jersey, and we would go down to the beach. And, one of the reasons I love the beach and that it is so peaceful and calming for me is because I think of my early days and us going to the shore a lot. It was free to go to the beach. Mm-hmm. So we did that a lot. So as a young woman, I grew up, again, just seeking acceptance from everyone and wanting to fit in and always feeling like I never did. I remember my dad kidding all the time that I was left in a basket on the front steps, and that's how I came to the family. And it was always a joke for him. And of course, I took it to a different level and always felt like the black sheep of the family, and kind of took that message of being left in a basket on the steps as a joke, and then part of it kind of stuck with me and always felt like I didn't quite belong, but at the same time, knowing those crazy people that I lived with were my people. They were my people. So it was interesting getting into relationships in my 20s and 30s. Mm-hmm. My relationships were about seeking acceptance and wanting to be whatever it is the person I was dating wanted me to be.
Right.
And I was often lost and exhausted and compromised myself in relationships. The other thing that colored my relationships was that I was sexually abused as a child by a neighbor. And it happened over a number of years. I think between the ages of probably 5 and 7. I don't have complete recollection of that time, but I do remember some of it. And so, a lot of my life, I felt like damaged goods and thought I didn't deserve anything that was good, let alone anybody's love, because I was damaged and used and dirty. I felt dirty a lot. And so, that's what I called into my life in my 20s and 30s until I started to work on that and heal that part of my life. A lot of that healing happened because I was sexually assaulted as an adult. And when I was going to the Rape Crisis Center in Prince George's County, Maryland, I started to work on that. And that's the time when I remembered the sexual abuse from my youth. And I did quite a bit of work during that time. I had a wonderful therapist at that Rape Crisis Center. Her name is Winona Fogg. And she helped me find joy and peace in my life during that time. And she was just she was masterful at her work and a force to be reckoned with. And so she was a real beacon for me, a beacon of light, and helped me through a very painful time. And that helped me to heal and start to ask for better, demand better in my life, to expect better in my life. And that was really the beginning of my self-development period. I started reading just about every self-development book there was in the 80s.
I can imagine.
And there were a lot of them. And I devoured every last one of them. And, eventually over time, I started to have better and better relationships because I just stopped putting up with stuff and stopped taking the crumbs that I expected early on. And the good thing is I have evolved now into having a very happy, peaceful, wonderful marriage with an absolutely fantastic man. And so healing is possible. Deep healing is possible. Growth is possible if we want it. My mother carried a lot of her pain. She also experienced sexual trauma as a teenager, and she carried that pain to her deathbed. She talked about some of it with me. She did quite a bit of counseling over the decades. I imagine she talked about some of that. I don't know, because I'm not privy to any of that information. But she and I talked about it some, and I do know that her reaction to my experience of sexual assault was not what I would have wanted, and certainly it was not what I needed because she hadn't dealt with her own.
Right.
And so she couldn't help me because she had never healed herself from her own pain. And I realize that now. And so there was no need to forgive her for any of that. My parents did their best around both of those incidents in my life based upon how we dealt with those issues at that time when I was a little girl.
Right.
So in the 1960s, we weren't really dealing with sexual assault. We weren't talking about it. It wasn't out there. Sex abuse of children wasn't something we talked about. And so my parents did take me and my siblings to a doctor. I imagine it was a psychiatrist. I do remember being in the playroom, and I remember a huge mirror in the room. It was actually a two-way mirror. Mm-hmm. And the doctor observed me and my siblings playing in that playroom. And I don't know after how much time, but at some point he told my parents that he didn't see that I was adversely affected by that sex abuse early on because of how I played with my siblings in that room for maybe an hour or so. I really have no idea how long we were evaluated. So there was that, but obviously I was deeply affected by it because I carried a lot of that pain into my teen years. And I had to deal with it too after I moved here to Texas in 2006 because my husband and I bought a house that is all one level. I never lived in an apartment prior to buying, even when I bought my first home, it was a condominium and it was on the top level because I never felt safe living on the ground level of a building. So when we first moved here, for the first 6 months, I did not sleep all the way through the night because I just had a fear. And a lot of that was the residuals of prior sex abuse in my life. And I did go to counseling after we first moved here in 2006 for about 9 months. And I had a very masterful, wonderful, a good-hearted therapist who helped me through that period. So that's the beginning. That's the story, some of the story of my pain and my experiences and some of my relationships. The good part is that I did evolve, and because I was willing to swim in the deep end and really look at my problems, look at my issues, look at my pain, look at my trauma, and to heal them in various ways, that I do now have a life that's overflowing with peace and joy, and that I do have great emotional freedom. And I love the life that I lead, and I do not run from any pain. In fact, I make it a point to face my pain because I know that there is healing on the other end of that. So I'll leave the story here, and there is a part 2 to this, as I talk a little bit more about what I experienced in my early days, and then really get it into the story of the healing and how I healed and some of the things that I used to heal my life. Some of those tools I still use today are very important to me, and my continued evolution and growth and transformation and coming into the fullness of who I am, even now in my 60s. So stay tuned for the next exciting adventure of the life and transformation of Kim Andrews.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And, that's what we want to do for these first few episodes is now you got to know who we are, and I hope you're listening to it right now. And just kind of going over where we were and where we're at now and how we're facing life and things that come up. And sometimes it's hard to go back and talk about the past, and there's always a part 2, always a part 2. And what does that part 2 look like for you and for us? And we're excited to be here on this journey. So as always, the choice is yours. You can sit on the edge with your toes in the water and make no significant change in your life, or you can come swim in the deep end with us and take another step closer to healing and peace, freedom, and joy.
So these recordings are now posted to Patreon. We did our first intro session where we talked about our mission and why we are doing this. That's available on YouTube. But now this particular session, session 2, and all subsequent sessions will be on Patreon. So on Patreon, there will be a nominal fee for listening. Additionally, we will have some added benefits and opportunities to swim in the deep end with us, and we'll roll those out in the next couple of months. After we kind of see how this is feeling and how we might be able to better serve you and help you swim in the deep end in your life and to come to a life of great freedom and joy. So I want to leave you with one question today. Are you willing really to swim in the deep end? And are you willing to face the things that have happened in your life? It doesn't matter how old you are. You can be 20, 30, 40, 50, in your 60s, 70s, or later. I believe that as long as you have breath, there is an opportunity for healing and greater joy and freedom. So ask yourself until we meet again, am I willing to heal what I have not healed yet? I invite you to say yes to that, because there is joy and freedom on the other end. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
See you in 2 weeks.